All right, welcome to the SIG Auth call for May 17th. Just have a few things on the agenda. If you have other things you want to talk about, feel free to add them to the end, and we'll probably have time to get to a couple more. Just wanted to start by calling out a few PRs that are in flight or recently merged since the last meeting. The first two are ones that I'm working on related to subdivision of kubelet access to the API. So the first one is tightening who can create mirror pods. And once you have a mirror pod, that it has to stay a mirror pod. So that was just a validation change that already merged. The second one is an admission plugin that is optional, like all admission plugins, that will limit nodes to only be able to create and update and delete themselves, and pods scheduled on themselves. So currently nodes can update the status of any node and update the status of any pod, and this would let you limit them to only modifying themselves and their own pods. So that's open for review. If you want to take a look or have comments, feel free.
Can you do a 3 more sentence summary of the second one?
Sure. So this is implementing the admission portion of what was proposed in the API subdivision proposal. Requests that the plugin can identify the node that they belong to. It locks down node and pod mutations.
And can you remind me what the way that is that identifies the node that it came from?
Currently, it is identifying it based on the client certificate that the kubelet requests in the TLS bootstrap. So if you have kubelets using credentials outside that pattern, they pass through this admission plugin. This plugin won't restrict them. It only restricts kubelets that it can identify as belonging to a specific node.
Cool, thanks, that makes sense.
Yep. All right. Next one, I think, was Mike Denise's. Eric, you want to talk about that? I think you threw it in the list.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's basically that we have an approver for kubelet TLS inside of the controller manager, and the PR here basically makes it pluggable for. So when a kubelet requests a certificate, there are a few steps. It first requests a client cert for itself based off of probably a bootstrapping token or something like that. And then once it has that client cert with the identifiable like username of the node, it can then request a serving cert. It can re-request a serving cert or re-request a client cert as those two expire. So rather than having a general policy of, yes, we're going to allow any kind of request, this switches the current group approver to use subject access reviews. And so a administrator can say, this kubelet may re-request a client cert or re-request a serving cert or request a new array or initial client cert based off of some rules. So the idea is to be using that you would use RBAC or some other authorization policy to actually say what types of requests a kubelet can make. Apologize if I'm not explaining that super well, but there are some examples that I'll drop in the issue that it was closing.
Yeah, and I'll point out that this is not required. So if you have more robust ways of verifying certificate requests, either by verifying that the public key associated with the request is paired to the node in some other system, like that a cloud provider can attest to, or you have ways of running processes on the node itself to verify the CSR, you're certainly welcome to approve certificate requests that way. This is just one possible way to approve them based on some common patterns for bootstrapping and renewing, rotating the client and serving certs associated with a kubelet. So I think part of this work is also splitting the controllers so that the signing controller just signs approved CSRs, and the approving controller you could run or not, depending on whether you were satisfied with the level of scrutiny it was applying to CSRs. So this lets you decouple that. All right, can someone talk to the next one?
Yeah, so this was something that was requested by some of the KubeADM people. It was requested that SIG Auth speak on whether we feel it's okay for basically the certificates used by the control plane, the serving certs and stuff like that, to be put in secrets in the kube system. So for self-hosted control planes, you have the API server running as a pod within the control plane, and this PR would start injecting the actual certificates that the API server kube system. I will note that this is how BootKube does this. So on our end, we do something similar, but there's sort of a outstanding question of, are secrets secret enough for this to be an okay practice for self-hosted clusters? For
self-hosted, do you mean like a static pod? I'm curious how this works in, like, what's the bottom level?
So there is no bottom level, actually. So the way that at least BootKube works, I'm not entirely familiar with the way KubeADM and the way that BootKube and Tectonic work, is that there is some initial bootstrap process by which a initial API server runs and initial control plane runs, creates identical pods, not mirror pods, but actual real pods in the kube system, and then the initial bootstrapping control plane goes away.
I see.
The actual, we personally do checkpointing, so we have a process that will take the description of the pod and write it to disk. So if all the masters reboot at the same time, then the kubelet can the checkpointer will sort of restore it from the last known good state. But a part of doing that is that it is convenient to have the TLS assets or whatever other configuration that the self-hosted control plane would need in Kubernetes itself. So within that theme, this PR attempts to put the assets that the API server, for instance, will need in the API. So this includes serving certificates and such. So,
yeah, that is concerning, right? Concerning in that, once you have the serving certificate, you are capable of presenting yourself as a valid master. You would have to get traffic directed to yourself, but before, you would have to get traffic directed to yourself, and you would have to find a way to fake this key. If it's exposed as a secret, then say anything in the controller manager would have access, as a for instance. Anything that manages to compromise many controllers, and I guess I won't say most, GC, namespace controller, token issuer control, lots and lots of controllers that watch secrets.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with I definitely agree that this is a less secure way of running it than just having it on the host or something like that. I guess the real question is, with the improvements to secrets and the improvements, sort of coming in the future, it seems like we should be using secrets to store secrets. And then as the improvements in like creating RBAC policies that restrict access to these type of things improves, and as we continue to do stuff like Liggett's PR to restrict who can read individual secrets, it seems appropriate to put the secrets in Kubernetes secrets.
So I think that I'd be more comfortable with it if we got these are the improvements that we have to prevent exposure completed first, and then put these in there second, right?
So a couple of things, David, I think, to consider here. So the first one is that generally these things are sitting on disk. If we let people, if somebody compromises a controller in a crazy way, they can launch pods that run on the master nodes that allow you to map, host directories, and then you can go ahead and read them. So well, we don't have any controllers that have PSP permissions yet, right? And that's exactly what PSP is designed to stop.
Yeah, but I think we're going to have controllers with PSP permissions pretty soon.
I don't think so. Well, so actually, the interesting thing about PSP is that PSP would be able to, if you granted a service account the access to the PSP, the controller manager could create a pod on that node. So it can definitely bypass PSP. We haven't really, so this is kind of like the broader question is, right now there's about 5 channels whereby you can compromise a cluster pretty much instantly once you can get to the point of taking over a controller or seeing all secrets. There's 4 or 5 things that aren't in the short-term roadmap to block that.
So the other thing that I want to, aren't you able to run where each controller gets its own service account, and we could essentially just make sure the RBAC policies don't give access to these secrets?
You can't, everybody goes, I need access to all secrets. Nobody says, give me access to secrets only in the namespaces I want. So right now, pretty much every integration that deals with secrets has a get secrets in all namespaces. And just in practice, like,
that's not, okay, so if one of those things gets compromised,
So let's think about it. If are we talking about like a really powerful controller, like a replication set controller? Is that what we're talking about, getting compromised?
Ingress is a great example of it today. If you have a bug in Nginx in your Ingress controller, it's very likely that will be used to escalate to root access on your cluster in 2 steps.
Well, you should also not be running Ingress where it can watch all secrets.
But everybody's ingresses today ask for all secrets by default. So I think maybe what I'm saying is, what I was going to say is there's 4 or 5 avenues, and there's a real challenge that we need to go block all those off. Until those are blocked off, doing this doesn't actually make the cluster less secure. But to David's point, I think this is the tension, right? Is like, we want to get to the point where we go do those security things. How do we balance the convenience now and being able to separate and tease it apart? I don't know of anything that would, getting access to Cube system secrets will always be very, very bad as long as there are any controllers in that namespace that have service account tokens. So this doesn't make a cluster less secure. It just means that there are a number of, when we go to close the hole in the future, it's one more thing we'll have to take into account. But that's not the end of the world.
Yeah,
have we considered using the certificates API for this?
Well, the certificates API needs a private key to be able to sign stuff, and
the first one does,
yes.
Right? But we can do that the normal way. On subsequent, masters joining, we can use the certificates API for this.
So I think Mike, it's worthwhile to think about, like, if we're running multiple API servers, do they each have their own certificate that they mint, and now we have to manage essentially 3 parallel sets of routes if you're running 3 masters?
So I'm talking about API servers, and I'm talking about serving certificates right now. And I don't see that as terrible thing if they all have their own certificate.
No, and that's fine. But the idea is that what if the endpoint implementing the certificates API goes down? So we need high availability for the certificates API itself, which means that we need.
You are talking about specifically this distributing the CA key.
Yeah, I think, that's once you distribute the CA key, everything else ends up being downstream from that.
I mean, my take on this is that this isn't going to make the system any less secure. And the real question is, if we want to allow this, and by allow this, I mean, if we want to say that's probably okay, we should just be really sure that the future improvements we have won't be complicated by this. If we think that being able to view secrets or create pods in Cube's system, and by create pods, like when you create a pod, you can run a process that gets access to the secret. If we think that that is going to be something we want to tease apart in the future, doing this now might complicate that. If we think that getting access to secrets in Cube's system is always going to be game over, then this isn't really any worse than what we have today with the controller service accounts.
Yeah, this feels to me like we're going in a different direction to sort of where I'd like to go, where we're using kind of external secret stores that are much better at, and deliver enterprise features that we want for, the most sensitive secrets. And we're talking here about kind of putting a very sensitive secret inside the existing secret system.
Well, so even if we used an external secret store, you need a way to verify yourself against that. And then that secret becomes just as sensitive as the root certificate itself.
That's true, but I don't think we want to distribute that via secrets either. So like the route that we use, to mint those identities, I don't think should be inside the secret system. I think we should aim for like non-exportable if we can, right? Like some sort of interface that lets us, make that key so the attacker can't reach it.
And I think that there is a tension here between managing this stuff explicitly and which moves away from self-hosting versus having the system manage itself.
Yeah,
if you have 3 different masters and you have to distribute even a single file across all those things and actually keep that file up to date, that becomes difficult.
And I think we had this discussion at the beginning of Cube Admin, which was, we said there's really 2 kind of security models. One where you build up the rings, so you isolate etcd, and then you give credentials from etcd to the masters, and then you isolate the masters from the nodes, and you don't let the masters schedule workloads on the masters. And that generally fits with a lot of classic security models, right? You can reason about who has access to etcd, you can reason about who has access to the master. Masters can't compromise themselves just because you have access to the API. The trade-off there is that you give up the ability to do this magic self-hosting. I think it's somewhat reasonable. We said this at the beginning of Cube Admin, that if you're doing self-hosting, you're not trying to build a fully secure cluster. You're implicitly running at a lower level of security that you can't get back via tricks on the API. You're saying, I'm accepting that this is less secure for these particular types of threat models.
And to be clear, Clayton, I think what I would say is that, we'd want kubeadmin to be able to gracefully be able to upgrade the type of security and say, well, look in this directory for the certificate and don't distribute it using whatever mechanism.
Right, yeah. And if this is a clearly defined trade-off, I mean, David, to your concern, like if we clearly delineate two models where there's self-hosting where the goal is to get up as easy as possible, and there's self-hosting where you're trading some convenience for better organization, do you still view this as hampering our ability to impose those protections in the future?
It might seem a little strange. I would feel better about it if it were in a separate namespace, just because I think partitioning the problem would be a little easier at that point, right? We do have pods that run inside of Kube system, for instance, right? A lot of people start pods in there for things like DNS, and there was at least something else that I saw when I was looking for some of the RBAC roles. Partitioning it off in a spot where we say, like, don't create any pods would make me feel better about our ability to lock it down later. Explicitly listing the trade-off and saying, if you do this, then compromise of any of a number of pieces will compromise your entire cluster.
Yeah. I see it similar to the node joining. Like, you can join from a shared secret, and you are as secure as that shared secret, and you're kind of giving up the ability to assert at some later point that all your nodes have the identity they should. Any one of them could have grabbed an identity for some other node, and it's very hard to kind of go after the fact and lock that down. But it's a lot easier, right? And so if you're setting up something small and you want to spin up 10 nodes, maybe that's acceptable. But we also support the model of you can tell a node to join given a specific credential. So, like, we support both of those approaches. If we want to support telling the API server, use these credentials and certs, or have it store it and propagate it across, as long as we support both and kind of are clear about the trade-offs, I guess it doesn't bother me.
That makes sense, right? I mean, it's also you can't put Humpty back together again, right? Once you've had it exposed for a while, if more than, you have to track it back and say who is every single person that has ever accessed this and what did they do with it. But yeah, with two options.
I do think, there's a danger here that if we say, if you store these secrets, these certificates as secrets, it's going to be less secure. There's an implicit promise that if you store them externally, you're going to be more secure. And the truth is that if you can run an arbitrary pod in Kube system on most clusters, you've owned the cluster.
There's also just there are a lot of sensitive things stored in secrets, and this is something we keep getting back to. And I think the long-term goal is going to have to be to improve the ability for us to store secrets. If we can't use our own, if we can't use our own primitives to store things securely, that seems like a problem. And our sort of goal, our mental model here is, secrets might not be the most secure thing today, but using the existing primitives, or using, at least buying into the concept of secrets and hoping that it will improve later.
I guess it depends how much of Vault you want to re-implement, though, right?
Vault does you no good. It's not about storage of secrets. It's about access to secrets.
Yeah,
and so Vault doesn't do you any good if you don't have a bedrock way to authenticate to Vault.
Yeah, I agree. So I think identity is definitely the thing we need there that's missing. But I mean, if we're talking about, what's good in a secret store, it's like all those things I laid out in the doc, right? And so if we're, going to go down this path of like building a really solid secret store inside of Kubernetes, then that comes with, people will be asking for HSM support. People will want very, very detailed logging. People will want a bunch of integrations with other authentication backends. And so when we kind of travel down that path, we're basically re-implementing features of external stores that they're already good at, right?
I guess my implication wasn't that we should make secrets amazing, but that we should have some good recommended strategies for storing secrets, right? So it wasn't that, yeah.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Like, I think, and that's what I was trying to get out in this secrets talk too. Like, giving us these identities to, have the ability to use those external stores and take advantages of those features where they're already mature. And, you also get the security advantage of like having a completely separate system. And so, a compromise inside your Kubernetes cluster, you still have some guarantees about, this fairly constrained API and off-host logging and that kind of thing, that where you can, at least try and piece together, what was used at what time.
I was going to say, I think to even going past the secrets thing, the challenge here is that what we really need to do is we need to define our threat model and our layers, and we need to put the framework in place so people can reason about what those layers can do, right? Like, we have tools that can be used to construct a secure system. We need to we committed to this for 1.7, and I am just as guilty of not helping drive this to conclusion as anyone. We probably need to double down on the getting to the point where we can put the framework in place so people can say, what are the, how do I think about this? How do we make recommendations? And how do we prioritize the features that make the deep security possible and the simple security understandable?
And Joe, to your point, I do think putting them as secrets makes it less secure than as files. I mean, it's objectively harder to get pod write permissions than it is to get secret read permissions, right? I mean, lots of things have the ability to read secrets that can't go create pods in kubesystem.
So for me, there's the original use case for secrets was to get things out of images. So stuff like API keys or database path, stuff that you would have considered putting in an image before, it's somewhat better that it's not in that image. And it provides like a portability story. I don't think like stuff as foundational as identity for nodes or for service accounts is like in that same category. And if you have a way to distribute that out of band, that's better.
Yes.
Because you really want, like, forget about avoiding a compromise. I just want to at least be able to audit and figure out how to compromise and how it happened. And for auditability, you'd really like to like have a separate place that distributes those secrets, I guess.
Yeah, and I was going to say, like, all of the discussions we've had around identity and access to external secrets, there's no reason that service account tokens have to be in the API other than it's convenient for people to use. A service account token is an assertion by the node that this container is this container. And if the API server still trusts that node, then the API server can leverage whatever it is to make that decision. Getting to a point where we don't have service account tokens, or they can be turned off. Getting to the point where you're not storing secrets that are not specifically geared towards workloads are good steps in that direction to reasoning about what secrets can do.
Yeah, to me, the fact that they're in a secret is not really part of the API. It's the fact that it shows up automatically in a place where clients can find them in your file system path for a pod.
Yeah, maybe, and I don't know if this is a discussion for the bootstrapping, group or for kubeadmin or not. It probably doesn't belong here, but the idea of the best way to subdivide anything, including self-hosting, is to actually subdivide it as opposed to keeping it, having it all together with those things. And so if down that path, if the secrets were on a file versus in the API server, it's also relevant to say maybe there should be a Bootstrap API server that is totally separated, that is only accessible on one machine. That's the thing you go back to when you want to bring the cluster back up. And I know that's been discussed. I don't think we have to discuss it here, but that is another way to subdivide secrets that works today that doesn't require all of these features in order to continue to be secure.
So is this use of secrets in line with what we want secrets to be used for? Putting values for the control plane to use, not for injection into pods?
I feel like the reality is that if somebody can run a pod and cube system, they own it, right? If they can read secrets, they own it. And you know, I think that's the fundamental problem. I mean, like, I'm thinking about this, and it would almost be safer to actually put this in a third-party resource that nobody else is watching in a separate namespace, or back it out, than it would be to put it in a secret.
I mean, I think when you say kube system, I'm hearing two things. There's certificates for nodes, and there's service account tokens for important service accounts. I think yeah, we need to get that stuff out of kube system and just have it be not. There's no need for it to be fetchable that way. It needs to just appear in the right place.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would question the assertion that we're always owned if you can create stuff in kube system. I think you could build a system such that that's not true. Might be true today.
Okay, but if we could build a system where that's not true, would that system then also be acceptable for putting things like the root certificates in there?
I don't know that it would look like that. I think it would look like the things that need those certificates and credentials, obtain them from they obtain them from a credential store. And what that credential store looks like, it could be like an external one like Vault, or it could be...
But Jordan, how do you authenticate yourself to that thing?
So that's where you get into the chain of trust, right? So a node, rather than taking a service account credential and putting it into the API, where anyone who can read the API can see it, at the point where a service account credential is needed, something has to request it, and it's created at that point. So when a node runs a container, the node says, give me a credential for this. And so you don't have things persisted and readable by anyone. That's the auditability problem that we have with secrets today. And I don't know how we get from the shape that the secrets API has to something that doesn't have that problem. And that's why I question, like, oh, we'll just put more stuff in secrets and we'll improve secrets and eventually we won't have this auditability problem. I think the way the secrets API works, where secrets stay readable, is problematic.
So yeah, again, I think I'm such a freaking broken record on this. It all comes down to identity and delegating identity and chain of trust.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree too.
but I think that's, you know, there is some a priori something, and the question is whether you all of a sudden include that in the API as well. And
right. I don't see how we take the secrets API and stay compatible with the current API and then layer like chain of trust and subdivision on top of it.
I think nodes need to come with identities. If you're on a cloud provider, cloud providers are in a position to have nodes pop out of the ether with node identities pre-provisioned that we can trust to have them join the cluster, rather than CSR. CSR is cool as like a self-hosting thing, but I don't think it's how you'd want to do it on a cloud provider, because it just it unnecessarily exposes the secrets. So I think, then you have to have some kind of machine installation procedure that happens prior to the machine like joining the cluster. And I think that is the place where you hook in the node identity there. So node identity, I believe we can handle outside of Kubernetes for people that are sensitive, who want serious levels of security.
And I agree with Eric. I do not believe that Kubernetes should prescribe this is the way that you establish the identity of the kubelet. Different infrastructures will have different ways of establishing node identity, whether it's with flashing a hardware security module or a cloud provider makes a VM with a VTPM on it or anything of that nature.
So I totally agree with you there. I think node identity and establishing node identity is a separable problem from Kubernetes. Having components then leverage that node identity to stitch themselves together as sort of the root control plane is another problem. Having workload identity be able to delegate and base off that root of trust is a separable problem. And I think, Kubernetes can integrate with that, but I think there's places where that exists outside of Kubernetes. So I think we're going in circles here. I think, at the end of the day, if we had a strong LOAS-like identity thing, then all these problems would go away. We don't have that, and so that's why we're trying to sort of bootstrap this stuff up from ground zero. Like stuff like the certificate API itself would go away, and we wouldn't need that if we actually had a strong identity system.
I think we would keep it for like the Minikube and like kicking the tires case, but we would say this is not how you do it when you're serious.
What we would do is we would actually take that set of APIs and we would say this is a self-hosted version of this identity control plane that you can actually activate or not, right? I think the identity control plane is an underlie separable thing. We could have a self-hosted sort of kick the tires type of thing. That's great. But I think, I would view that as not an official Kubernetes API, but rather something that is a sort of, stubbed out implementation to get you up and running with a single binary type of thing. We're not there.
So that's for node identity. For pod identity, I think we also want to have an option of the pod credentials just showing up from behind the scenes rather than flowing through the Kubernetes API. And I believe we can also get there. The important thing is like the labels and the names and the serialization, all that stuff. It's not like what path the bits take to get to the kubelet or the node. If they pop up out of a virtualized path or something, that should also work. Or if you have a special kubelet driver or whatever, then like.
So yeah, my idea.
We do have like on our agenda, we do have a working group on container identity, which might be a better subject. We might discuss this specific identity problem under that case, so we can move on.
So if kubeadmin's goal is to make it easy to stand up a cluster so that people can use Kubernetes in a reasonably secure way, and the kubeadmin team feels that reasonably secure is not made significantly worse by this, is the kubeadmin team okay with the possible implications that down the road doing this may be convenient now but might cause more problems? Because I think we've established this isn't going to make anything much worse, and as long as it's communicated clear to the user what they get on the tin, are you willing to potentially come back later and say, hey, by the way, this may be bad for these cases and it's not a good idea anymore?
How about this? And this is piggybacking on some of the kubelet stuff. What if we had a certain type of secret? Well, it doesn't freaking show up in the URL, but okay, so let's say that we had a namespace called kube super secret, and we had some sort of special authorizer that authorizer is composed, but it's a way that we could essentially say only this identity ever gets to read these secrets.
This is getting to the secret subdivision stuff, and like the cross namespace watch and list is what, like when you try to combine that with like filtering of specific namespaces or specific types, we've gone around in circles trying to figure out how to match the current API with something that lets you subdivide, and I don't see it.
Actually, a third-party resource might be more
I was going to say, I think the third-party resource might actually be the most secure way to do that in this system as it is today.
Yeah.
I think
because we can write a very restrictive RBAC policy on that.
Secrets is letting you rapidly build things and trade off speed for security. And then we come back later and we do it after the pattern is proved out. We do it in a more secure way. I think it's fine to continue, have this continuous process where new ideas get implemented using secrets, and then they get pushed down as they become established.
I mean,
I guess what I'm
actually like.
is there,
I like
there's
custom
some small
resources.
tweaks. So go ahead.
I like the idea of using custom resources for things like this, like keeping the idea of secrets as intended for consumption by containers. And if you have other uses that are very API oriented, glomming a bunch of things into secrets, like the ingress controller and whatever else, you have a lot of things accessing the API that you might not want your secrets and use case exposed to. And whatever we go do for like container identity isn't really going to address like delivery of serving certificates to control plane members necessarily. You know, the container identity stuff is a really different discussion.
So I think the underlying problem is that we have namespaces for tenancy of users, but controllers that need to access all namespaces, they need another type of tenancy that like limits them only to their controller's secrets, their controller's pods. Because right now, you don't want to install a third-party controller because it might accidentally delete your pods, you know, that you don't want it to delete, or get secrets you don't want it to get. So I think we need a discussion where we figure out how we're going to limit.
So you have applications and users, and you have to take the cross product, and you just invented OAuth. No, I think you're right, Eric. I'm sorry. I think you're right. I think there is a separate axis here. Sorry I interrupted you.
Yeah, I think there are integrations. There are integrations that target a kube cluster that don't need global visibility on secrets. Just that. Because you can still make quick and dirty and have useful things that don't need global access. We'll just put that under that bucket. And we need to make sure we don't repeat the new mistakes. And I think like that's the best part of this discussion is it does highlight we need the threat model and the layering to be really clear. I would actually be good if out of the result of this, we go update the original secrets design doc to say this is what secrets are for. Is there somebody who wants to take the discussion of this and turn that into something on that PR or on that proposal?
Which secrets design doc are you talking about now?
The very first one, the pre-Cube 1.0,
okay.
That covers what secrets are for. Because I think we actually have some weasel word language in there, but it might be good to take kind of the general thoughts and apply that and try to get that into a doc.
Yeah, okay. I'll have a stab at that, of rewording it to what we think secrets should be, and send that out.
And that could even fold into the secrets roadmap. It should definitely inform it at least.
Yeah.
So I think it is worthwhile to splinter off Eric's discussion around sort of how do we limit access to secrets based on, and resources in general based on controllers, because I think controllers are way too powerful right now. They essentially get root on the cluster.
Yeah.
We've got like a doc that lists 4 different ways to do this. I can share it. I don't know if you want me to file an issue or something, I can do that.
Yeah, we definitely need something to start this. It fits into the larger theme of things that we said we were going to do in this time frame.
I can start an issue. Is that the right place to start, or?
Personally, I feel like these discussions make most progress with a call, but because you can throw ideas around, but there's not as clear a record there.
I mean, if you want to start a thread and point to a doc and then have a call around that doc, as long as what's discussed in the call is kind of making it into the doc so that it's not tied up in a recording or something.
I'll make a doc. I'll mail for participants to the mailing list and set up a call to people who are interested.
Sounds good. Okay, Greg, you want to give the executive summary of the roadmap that you put together?
Yeah, so I basically took kind of Eric's plan for secrets and tried to come up with what I thought would be good properties of design goals for what we want out of secrets, and then looked at kind of what we have and what we still need, and then tried to map out over the course of 3 releases or so, kind of where we can get to with all that stuff. And so you can see in the doc there's a bunch of properties about encrypted at rest and encrypted at transit and mutual authentication and stuff around kind of how we handle secrets. And then basically I'd like to rely on external stores. So I'd like to get identity so that we can rely on external stores to do some of that without implementing all of it ourselves. Because I think that's where people want to go. So people who are already using some sort of secrets management just want to use the one. They just want to have one place they can audit these things, one place they can defend. And so they really just want, in my view, Kubernetes to be able to talk to those things and identify themselves to it. So in the kind of like the longer term part of this, down the bottom, there's design for identity that will be external, that we'll be able to use to talk to services like Google KMS, to Vault, to Amazon KMS, and be able to authenticate pods to those services, and then release secrets based on those identities. So the short-term stuff is kind of the database encryption proposal that I've also been working on with Clayton, and he's been writing code for. And Jordan's got the kind of scope reduction of the visibility of secrets, the kind of the problem of like all nodes need access to all secrets. So trying to reduce that using an authorization controller. And yeah, the kind of more medium, longer term stuff is identity to access external stores is kind of the thrust of the document here.
Yeah, so as we kind of think through the different use cases that people use secrets for, this is focused around secrets delivered into containers. It'd be good to call out if there are non-goals for this, like
that's probably a good idea.
Control plane.
Given this discussion, that's probably a good idea.
or say we recognize these other use cases; those are separate, have different constraints and plans. So
yeah, that's right. I mean, my view of the system was really like, I've got these things that my application needs, and I don't want to put them in my containers. I don't want to put them in my source code. I need some place to store them. I've already got Vault or something similar that's storing this stuff for all my other systems. I just want to use that, and to get those kind of Vault secrets into my application.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm happy to take further feedback if anyone has anyone, and yeah, I'll add a non-goal about control plane.
All right, Clayton, you want to talk about the container identity stuff? I mean, or keep talking about the container identity stuff.
Yeah, so I don't think it's any surprise that a bunch of folks, both on this call and in other areas, are asking the question, how do I've got this container, we're reinventing everything in Kubernetes, and the next thing we're going to go reinvent is Kerberos. So we're like, hey, we need to come up with a way to give processes identity and then, assert that identity to other people. So I figured it would be a good idea to, because this affects a lot of different SIGs, because this is a fairly broad design topic, it would be good to try getting a set of people who are interested and involved together to kind of work through the implications to get to either a proposal or a set of use cases, or we can kind of define what the end goal is, but something, just short of implementation to at least ensure that, all the issues have been raised and that there's folks involved. It seemed like there was a reasonable amount of support on SIG Auth. The model suggested was to do a working group, which we have tried to do with resource management. It worked okay. There's been some follow up about, how do you communicate anything across SIG? And we said, working groups can kind of work for that when you want to get something done. So is there anyone on this call who is concerned about doing something like that, or wants to, object or alter the arc of what that might be? It's intentionally very vague, other than container identity.
I love that you're doing this. I just would like to make sure from the inception we get people from other SIGs involved as well. Like Federation is very much, I think, adjacent to this.
I have a feeling this is going to be the topic which we set the first working group meeting, and 75 people show up, and then we'll hit the Zoom limits and spend all of our time trying to switch from Zoom to something else. So yes, I think we may need to break it down into smaller problems even. Which would be a good thing, I guess.
We can invite each SIG to say that most 3 people or something. I don't know. I mean,
yeah, that one's, we could probably have lurkers. Well, I mean, a lot of people are going to lurk. Resource management had this. I think 60 people were at the first call, and then 30 people showed up to the next one, and 15 to the next one. So
just make sure the first meeting is really, really boring, and then only the people who are really invested will show up to the second.
Jordan, do you know how to manage committees? Is that what this is about?
We're going to spend the first half hour looking at RFCs.
Any other things, concerns, comments people want to bring up? I figure I would do just a simple email and send it to SIG Auth, and then if everybody seems like they agree with the general thoughts on that, send it to some other SIGs and then to Kubernetes Dev.
Yeah, Federation, Node, Network, and even copying Dev.
I hesitate to say it, but I think it also involves API machinery, because as we start federating the API control plane, authenticating across that's going to become a critical thing too. Right now, there's this mess of flags for any webhook.
Yeah, we could just kick them out. We don't really like them.
Yeah, those guys suck.
All the API machinery people who care are also on this call.
That's true. I know. Well, it's there's definitely overlap there for sure.
Yeah, and one of the concerns, I think, to Eric's point, is that there's a lot of topics that will interlock and overlap. I think a good goal for the working group should be to figure out what is explicitly left out of scope, and we should try as much as possible to carve it down to the simplest possible things that we all agree on that allow someone to make forward progress, like getting to the point where a pod or a container has something inside of it that lets it say who it is, and being as, I guess, flexible as possible for experimentation. Even if there's something that we may all want to agree on, I don't know that everybody in the world is going to sign up for Kubernetes Identity 1.0. All of those Kerberos users will probably just laugh at us. And so I do think there's some level of, we may want to we need to figure out how to decide what we don't want to decide.
Yep. This would be a good topic for the developer summit in a few weeks.
The leadership summit? No.
Or whatever. Yeah, it's called.
I would say the leadership summit is already something that I have grave concerns about, because it's turning into technical leadership when it was intended to be coordination and the health of the project. I feel like it would be the wrong time to talk about it.
Good.
We can definitely conduct the experiment of whether we can get working groups working. That would be a good thing to the leadership. Like how do you effectively manage a bunch of different opinions across a bunch of different people with conflicting goals, for sure.
Well, I look forward to your email and the experiment that follows.
I'm sure it will be messy.
Okay. Well, we are out of time. Thanks, everyone. And feel free to chime in on those docs and designs and the thread that Eric and Clayton start. Talk to you later.
Bye.